Last week when we gathered here for worship, we gathered with the usual COVID protocols. I'm not going to say that we've ever really gotten used to them, but they've been what we have operated under for the past 2 years when we have been allowed to gather in in-person worship. We had restricted numbers, we had ropes on the seats, we had carefully laid out seating plans, we had pre-registration, and once everybody was inside, we locked the doors. Now last week, we were able to announce a further reopening this week and the ability to more fully open the doors of our church. I have to say that when I made that announcement last week, I didn't know what that would mean. I didn't know who would feel more comfortable coming back now that we have fewer restrictions. And of course, we never know what curveballs COVID might still have to send our way. But even with that uncertainty, what I felt last week in our service was this tremendous sense of hope. It was like this Holy Spirit energy at work in our worship and in our congregation. I don't know whether you felt it, whether you were with us last week in person or online. I don't know whether you had that sense, that energy, that warmth, that hope. During our final hymn last week, I found myself weeping, especially when the choir came in with that 4-part harmony, offering us that choral sound that we have almost not heard at all, or heard very rarely over the past 2 years, and which to me is such a symbol and a sound of our communion with one another. I just found that I had tears streaming down my face. Because what I felt most of all last week was this possibility of seeing home on the horizon. That after all that we've been through over the past 2 years, that there could be a path home opening for us after all and finally. Matt just read to us the parable of the prodigal son. Now, this parable comes up at this time of year once every 3 years. And so, because I have spent most of my life in the church, I have had a lot of opportunity, and maybe you have too, to hear about this parable and to reflect on this parable. Depending on where I am spiritually or emotionally at any given time, I find myself drawn to and relating to different characters in this story. So when I'm feeling particularly honest about my own faults and failings, when I am able to see clearly the ways in which my choices and my behavior have at times cut me off from friendships, from family, from patterns that give me life and wholeness, then I relate to the prodigal son. And I can certainly think with tremendous gratitude of the times in my life when God has shown up for me in ways that I didn't expect and certainly could not have earned. I think about the times and people in my life who have embodied God's unconditional love for me in a very particular, albeit human way. And the ways in which I have been so startled and blessed by somebody loving me no matter what. When I am worried about somebody that I love. When I see them making choices that are harmful to themselves, that are destructive, that cut them off from me and from those who love them. When I see that distance between me and somebody that I love, and I don't know how to overcome that distance, well, at those times I really relate to the Father in this story. Because I do understand something of what it might feel like to see somebody that you thought that you had lost show up on the path right in front of you. And I can understand how you might want to just throw caution to the wind and all practicalities aside, and all you can possibly do is open your arms and love them and celebrate that they have found their way home. When I'm at times in my life when I'm frustrated by injustice that I see in the world, when I see people behaving in terrible ways and they don't ever seem to be held accountable for their choices, well, at those times, I can really relate to the good son. The son who sticks it out, who's always there, and who cannot for the life of him understand how this terrible brother of his, who threw away everything and caused so much harm and so much hurt, how he could not only not be held responsible for his actions, but that his father could actually throw a party for him. I think that's why Jesus tells us these parables, in order to give us that opportunity to come at it from different perspectives, to wrestle together in where we see ourselves in these stories, and to find a deeper truth. This week, when I was looking at this parable, what resonated for me the most was not one of the characters. What resonated for me the most were the settings and the movement between those settings. I thought about that prodigal son off in alien territory. And you know, somehow this week when I was reading the parable, I didn't care so much about what choices or behaviors led him to be there. I just felt the pain and the hunger and the isolation of where he found himself. And it seemed to me such a metaphor of where we have been together collectively over these past 2 years. All of the painful, lonely territory that we have had to navigate, and all of the barriers that have been between us and that sense of community, that sense of home that feeds us and gives us life. And I have to say that the image that came most clearly to mind as I was thinking about this parable was the locked doors of our churches. And I know that we locked those doors for very good reason. I know that we were trying to be responsible and that we were responding to a global health crisis. I'm not saying that we did the wrong thing at all. But I am saying that those closed, locked doors of our church are such a symbol of how disenfranchised and alienated we have all been over these COVID years. They are a symbol of the pain that we have collectively had to bear, that we could not open the doors of our church home in order to welcome people in to worship God together. I thought about that movement between that alien land and the son finding his way home. I thought about those open arms of unconditional love that greet him when he gets there. And it seems to me that that must be what we're doing here. If we're here gathered in prayer and gathered as a community of faith for any reason, it surely must be that. It surely must be that longing on each one of our hearts to know that God's unconditional love is for us too. To know that no matter where we find ourselves, there is a path home for us too. And surely that's why it is so important and such a gift and blessing that today we can leave our doors open. Because certainly if we need to receive that message of God's great love and God's welcoming us home, then surely that message needs to be offered to anybody who might want to come through our doors. And surely that's why we don't just come here, we also leave here. We also leave here because we actually can be participants and witnesses to God's unconditional love. We can be part of the radical hospitality, the radical welcome of God. And in small and very human and mostly quite ordinary ways, we can go out into the world and we can make choices that bear witness to God's love and God's homecoming. And you know, the thing is that as I look at the world around us, what I see everywhere is I see that longing. I see that longing for a message and a promise like that. If I'm being honest, I certainly see that longing in my own heart. That longing to believe against all odds that I am loved, warts and all. That when I get off track, there's a way home for me. I see that longing on the hearts of the people that I love. I see the way that the people that are closest to me in my life, that sometimes they get wrapped up in that striving for affirmation, to feel like they belong, to be reassured that they are loved, to be offered forgiveness when things don't go the right way. I see that longing in our COVID-weary world because the truth is that we bear really significant wounds from the isolation of these past 2 years. Collectively, we carry these significant wounds, and it's going to take us a lot of time and a lot of grace to find healing from where we've been. I see that longing in the stories out of Ukraine. Those pictures of bombed out buildings, of bodies on the street, of people fleeing for their lives, in an instant, in a heartbeat, suddenly having no idea where or how or when they might be able to feel like they're home. I see that longing in so many other displaced people across our world, because the reality is that what is happening in Ukraine is not unique. And there are all too many people who are living in the midst of conflict and war and who have had to leave their homes, and for whatever reason, they don't make the headlines of our daily news cycle. I see that longing in the people of Russia. My husband hung a flag, a Ukrainian flag, outside of our home this week. His family is Ukrainian by background and wanted us to stand visibly in solidarity with the people of Ukraine, and it's beautiful that he did that. I wish that we could also hang a flag for the people of Russia, because I see how they have also been displaced and alienated and hurt and harmed, and they are bearing the weight of sanctions that are inflicted on them because of their leaders' choices. They didn't choose to be at war with their brothers and sisters. And they have also been robbed of their sense of home in this conflict. In response to this longing that I see everywhere, and in response to the gift today of having our doors open, it seems to me that the most appropriate way of concluding my words today is with prayer. And so I'll ask that you join with me now in praying. God of prodigal love, thank you for the gift of peace that we enjoy. And thank you for the freedom of being able to practice our faith and to gather in worship. Thank you for the gift of being able to more fully open our doors this morning. Thank you for the message and promise of your unconditional love that we receive here. Guard and protect us in these steps of reopening. Help those who need to hear of your promise and your faithful love. Help them to find their way in here. Help us as we go out to bear witness in powerful and ordinary ways to the ways in which we have been blessed by your grace. And help displaced, lonely, hungry, hurting people our world over to experience in real and meaningful and embodied ways your mercy, your unconditional love, and the path that you open for all of us to find our way home. Amen.